This is Russell Scott. I want to talk about UFC 202. I'm a little late to the party. It's been more than a week since the fight. I wanted to do a video right away, but I've been quite busy with things. Let's get on with it. UFC 202, in the words of Brendan Schaub, was a game changer. In the words of Colin Cowherd, UFC 202 put the final nail in the coffin of boxing. What are your thoughts on that? Is boxing dead? Is boxing dying because of how good UFC is? I've been a boxing fan for over 30 years. When I was a kid, my favorite boxer was Tommy Hearns and Mike Tyson. That was a long time ago, and in the 80s and in the 90s and in the early 2000s, boxing was the shit. For my era. I know we can go back and say, hey, boxing was really good when there was Ali, Frazier, Foreman, Liston. I get it, but that wasn't my era. But my era has come to a close. And it came to a close with Manny Pacquiao versus Floyd Mayweather. The fight itself is obviously the shits. It's not a particularly good fight. But it was the ceremonial end of an era. Of course, Mayweather would go on to beat Andre Berto. Manny Pacquiao would go on to beat Tim Bradley. But essentially, that era is over. The era of Miguel Cotto, De La Hoya, Trinidad, Mosley, Gotti, Mayweather. Whether they're alive or dead, for all intents and purposes, all of these careers are now over. The new era of boxing, which has some great potential, has a hell of a problem. It has an uphill climb, because its greatest opponent is the UFC. Being such an incredibly strong supporter of boxing, I've done everything I could over the years to avoid UFC. I've not gone to the parties, I've not partaked in any of the events until I broke down and I ended up watching the Conor McGregor Nate Diaz fight, the first one, and on that same card I believe was Ronda Rousey versus Holly Holm. I've been hooked ever since. I bought every pay-per-view since then, and I have not regretted a single one. UFC, hands down, dollar for dollar, is a better product than boxing. There is no doubt about it. It is not even really an argument. The only thing is whether or not you're willing to accept UFC. Accept that UFC in many ways is the natural extension of fighting, of taking it to the next level. Boxing hasn't always existed in the form it does today. Not at all. The Marquis of Queensberry rules were a major turning point in the history of boxing. You know, there was a time when a round was when the other fighter was knocked down. And that was a round. You get knocked down, that's the end of the round. And then you would get up and you would go on again and, you could have 100 rounds. And then all of a sudden they decided to limit it and they had finite rounds. Now, when this happened, this is when boxing became corrupt. Because this is when decisions came into play, and it was no longer a pure sport where ultimately it was an endurance contest and you would get knocked down and you get up. You just keep going until you couldn't fight any longer. And that was a pure sport. But when the rounds became finite, corruption took over the sport of boxing, and it has always been a part of boxing. We don't even need to have that conversation. Everyone knows. So now we ask the question, was Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz 2, a fixed fight? Hey, these guys legitimately were fighting each other. That I have no doubt. The fix being that Conor McGregor is the biggest star for the UFC. Who knows if Ronda Rousey is fighting again? But certainly for male athletes, he is the biggest thing going. And they are not going to shoot the golden goose when all it does is lay golden eggs. So all Conor McGregor needed to do was get to the finish line. How many times did Conor McGregor look at the clock, tie up Nate Diaz and look at the clock, thinking to himself, all I need is to get to the finish line. Because if the fight's close, they're giving it to me. Conor McGregor was always going to win that fight as long as it was relatively close. If the fight had been 65% Nate Diaz, 35% Conor McGregor, they still would have given it to Conor McGregor. How did you score? Did you think Nate Diaz won that fight? Now, I've seen a lot of fights. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of fights. Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz too. I don't care who says what. That fight is one of the greatest fights of all time. Not that other fights haven't been really great or even better, but they're never generally billed or built up as being these great fights. They just sort of happen, and you may not even know who the guys are fighting. It's all proportional to who the people are, how much you care about these people, how many fans they have, what they bring to the table. Conor McGregor, too, delivered on every level imaginable, and in every way that Pacquiao Mayweather did not. Boxing's last pay-per-view before UFC 202 was the Terence Crawford fight. Terence Crawford versus Victor Postol. An awful, awful pay-per-view. Absolute waste of money. Should have been on free TV. Boxing has run out of stars. Triple G's awesome, but he can't sell a pay-per-view. Andre Ward? No one's going to pay money to see this guy unless he's fighting Sergey Kovalev. And that's one event. UFC is something I avoided for a long time. It wasn't boxing, and therefore it just wasn't something that I was interested in. But Conor McGregor, Nate Diaz too, was a game changer. And I don't see how boxing recovers. Colin Cowherd hit the nail on the head. Because boxing cannot, just by the very nature of the sport itself, boxing cannot deliver that level of action. It just won't be able to do it. And I think it's going to be interesting to see if McGregor and Mayweather fight. Have that crossover. Maybe boxing needs to sidle up to UFC. It was the other way around. Where do you rank Conor McGregor versus Nate Diaz 2 in your all-time best list? Where does it rank? I'll tell you, I have not seen a fight that good where I was so emotionally invested in the outcome of the fight in every single second since Mickey Ward versus Arturo Gatti, when they fought at the Mohegan Sun in one of the great fights. And that was just a fight that just happened. It was just a magical moment, HBO Boxing After Dark. It wasn't a big pay-per-view event by any means. It wasn't a pay-per-view at all. It was on free television. Gatti versus Ward. So you really need to go back. Do we have to go back to the Thrilla in Manila, where a fight was appropriately billed and lived up to the billing? A game changer, as Brendan Schaub says. What are your thoughts on UFC 202? And is it, as Colin Cowherd says, the final nail in the coffin of boxing? Like, comment, subscribe.